Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Busy week. This week we have Premier Eby taking on Ottawa over equalization payments, and we have a big new election platform promise from the BC Conservatives on healthcare with a lot of reaction to that. We're going to bring in the panel to break it all down. You know them, you love them each and every week. Jillian Oliver, Jeff Ferrier, and Allie Blades, thank you for being here. We are going to jump into our first topic here, which is Mr. Eby going to Nova Scotia for the annual meeting of premiers called the Council of the Federation. He used it to just throw haymakers at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, especially on the issue of equalization, which, if you're about to fall asleep listening to just the discussion of that topic, I will just point out that everyone's tax dollars in BC go towards what is essentially eventually a kind of a pot for equalization. So you're paying into it whether you like it or not. The question is, where does the money go to these so-called have-not provinces? And the Premier has a big fight to pick over that formula. So let us just start there. Allie, picking a fight on equalization 2.5 months before an election. What do you think?
Well, so there are some federal dynamics to consider here, and this is the potential that David Eby would support a Newfoundland lawsuit against Ottawa. But there are some things in BC that I think are unique that would defer David Eby to create a BC's own lawsuit, and one that he may want to create some distance from Trudeau not being very popular right now. And then, but the most important part of that being that we have the federal leader of the NDP here in BC as well, and that Jagmeet Singh props up the Trudeau Liberals. And so that might also be a reason why we're creating potentially a BC own path. What I thought was very interesting, though, this performance that David Eby could do in an election year is the equalization payments, but also making sure that BC is getting its fair share. About 12 weeks ago, there was some criticism that the federal budget, created some very strict and unrealistic expectations from the province that would then overlap in jurisdiction. And so I think that there's both the equalization conversation that can happen, but also ensuring that there's a fair share in what is owed to us without overlapping in the same types of services. And by that, it was a focus on education and healthcare and housing, where the feds were essentially trying to create their own models that duplicate what we already do in BC.
Mm-hmm. And which is a legitimate, I think, complaint by the Premier. It's just, right before an election, the timing feels a little weird, I guess. I don't know. Jillian, it seems like Eby's tipping point was also, in addition to the things Allie said, Ontario getting $1 billion out of the equalization fund the last couple of years. And no one thinks Ontario is a have-not province that should be collecting money from the other provinces. And he referenced that several times. So I don't know how that plays into the way he's sort of framing this.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful example for him to point to as this being kind of a real problem rather than just sort of a political one that he's trying to sort of cast around blame ahead of an election. I think, he's facing criticism over the perceived inability of the NDP to kind of get big things done. Gearing up for this election, I think it's remarkable about how many of the same things we're going to be talking about as we were in 2017 before the NDP first took power. Massey Tunnel, these big infrastructure projects that just haven't moved forward that are really needed and that really affect a lot of people's day-to-day lives in vote-rich areas that the provincial government's going to have to answer for heading into the fall. So I think it makes sense that, he really wants to use the Premier's conference to put a spotlight on why Ottawa is the roadblock and not them. But I think, at the end of the day, it is still the fact of the matter that it hasn't gotten done. And I think that's what really matters to people, regardless of where the blame lies. So I think that they're going to have to come up with more concrete plans for what they're actually going to do to get it done, rather than just, trying to put all the blame on Trudeau.
Yeah. Well, Eby, he did talk a bit about failing to sort of get Ottawa's attention properly on those files. And he said his approach, Jeff, when he started was go to Ottawa. I think he went 4 times. He had 4 meetings in BC with the Prime Minister. He had 8 phone calls. He said in some interviews, like he thought the plan here was that if you just go and make your case and tell people what you want that massive funding, you put it in front of the Prime Minister again and again, eventually you get it. And he said that has proven to be not the right approach because it went nowhere. And so it's a feeling of frustration that he seems to be articulating publicly as well, Jeff.
Yeah, it's true. And I think he's right about that dynamic with the federal government. It's interesting because I imagine there's a lot of folks in British Columbia who would say the same thing about working with the BC government, thinking that they could just go and make their case and get things done. But it's a hard slog. Look, at talking equalization for most folks is like trudging through molasses, only of interest for political geeks and nerds like me. I enjoy the stuff, but it's probably going to be the biggest rating killers we've had since we talked about accounting at ICBC. But
an argument that I won, let the record show on that.
Yeah, that's not correct. But let me paint a picture here about why folks should care and about why this is principled and I think politically smart for Eby. So you're a hardworking British Columbian small business owner. Like, times are tough. We talk about it every week. Everything's expensive. Every day you worry about making ends meet, but you pay your taxes expecting that your money is going to be used to improve your community, and if not yours, then to help someone who's not as well off as you. And that's for better schools, hospitals, and housing. Then one day you find out that a whole bunch of those tax dollars is being sent to Ontario, the center of the universe. Just ask them, the place with all the big banks and corporate headquarters, to pay for their schools, hospitals, and the government they have there now is really focused on the tax cuts. Ontario needs a whole bunch of things. They need a lot more humility. They need some submersible sump pumps for Drake's flooded home, and they could use a real NHL hockey team. But one thing Ontario does not need is money from BC taxpayers and businesses to fund their schools and hospitals and housing. I think demanding a judicial review of equalization is principled, and it's because the Premier is doing his job standing up for BC to make sure our money goes to solving our problems. But I think it's politically smart because it takes a natural and powerful issue away from his political opponents, the BC Conservatives, who, if I were advising them, I would be saying, you should be hammering on this and you should have started months ago. Daniel Smith did it really successfully with United Conservatives in Alberta, but the Conservatives here didn't, and now they're relegated to making these pleading weak statements about, shouldn't Eby be focused on BC and not worried about what's happening in Ottawa? So it's maybe it's still ICBC accounting territory here, but maybe it's a little bit more interesting for folks now. I don't know.
Yeah, it is a kind of a abstract issue for a lot of people to imagine this, but it's $15 billion a year, and it's your tax dollars that go to Ottawa and then get redistributed. So anyways, that was the Council of the Federation meeting in Nova Scotia, the last one for Premier Eby. We'll see who is Premier in 2025 for that same meeting, which ironically is hosted in Ontario.
We don't get to go into how Trudeau's only doing this because he only cares about Ontario and Quebec because that's where all the votes are. No. I guess we can forego that and move on.
We can forego that one for a different show. Bringing it back to BC, the BC Conservatives unveiled their first election platform in detail, their first kind of policy position, and this time it is on healthcare. 14-page healthcare plan focuses on using more private clinics and private services, wait time guarantees, where if you don't get your diagnostic or your test or your surgery within a certain time, the province under the Conservatives would pay for you to get it done out of province in another country or another province. So that is a big policy plan from the Conservatives, the first that they have released. Allie, anything jump out at you on both A, the policy itself and how it was delivered, and then B, a little bit on how you think it landed?
So one, I think that the BC Conservatives have done a really good job at capturing the public sentiment on one of the major issues as their first very refined and polished policy announcements, which tells me that John Rustad's summer tour is really working and that he's listening to what people are talking about. This is one of their very first big investments of resources and time to put forward this policy announcement as well. And I think that they did a really good job of putting out something that was super comprehensive, because that is indeed one of the criticisms of the BC Conservatives, is that John Rustad kind of creates policy on the fly and that it's not really backed up. There are like 14 pages of backed up facts in this one. I'm not 100% shocked at just how fundamental the shift is within this policy announcement. It's not off track of what the Conservatives have done previously in creating extreme statements. And I don't say extreme in a bad way. This is one of the perks of creating their new brand within the Conservative movement in BC. So there are some things in there that are shocking and offer a bit of a wow factor, but that's totally on brand with what the Conservatives have done in the past. I will also note that I think this is one of the very first tests to the BC Conservative team in message discipline, which is very important during an election year. This also, where in the early days of the Conservatives, there was a lot of criticism of independent candidate thought. And I think so far, I mean, it's only been like 24 hours, but so far the Conservative team have shared and supported everything that's within the policy. So we haven't seen that deviation from the pack where we have been critical before about the Conservative candidates.
Mm-hmm. So independent candidate thought was supposed to be a position of John Rustad's leadership. He was like, hey, candidates can do whatever they want. So we're sort of the rubber is meeting the road at this point in terms of message discipline. You're right. And if the party's going to have a platform, the candidates are going to have to repeat it rather than meandering out there and saying the opposite. So it'll be interesting to see how that lands. Jeff, I thought the NDP's response was this will be a massive cut to the system, but I don't quite see that in the platform itself. And I think, that sets up a kind of debate here about, I think there's been a 72% increase to the healthcare budget since the NDP took power, but we're not quite seeing a 72% increase in satisfaction or services in the healthcare system. So for them to come back and say this Conservative plan is a cut, how do you think that all of that kind of lands in the public mind?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the NDP line is going to be the most effective line on the Conservatives on this one, but you'll be shocked to hear that I disagree with Allie on this. I think she's right that it was smart for John Rustad to talk about healthcare. It's a top issue for the public. Opinion research shows the public is dissatisfied, Rob, as you say. But it's like John Rustad was handed a treasure map and he used it to start a campfire. It's palpably self-conscious. It's long for the sake of being long. It fails to achieve the basic purpose of political communications, which is clearly articulating a couple specific ideas for people to latch onto. It tries to do and say too many things in an attempt to be taken seriously, and ultimately it fails to do that because it's trying too hard to be taken seriously and not enough to communicate politically. It's flashy, but if you even do a little bit of scrutiny, it collapses. It's like a house of cards in a hurricane. No clear fiscal strategy, no detail at all how they'll pay for anything, which leaves voters wondering if there are cuts or tax hikes on the way. So they didn't fill the glass with information. Other folks are stepping in, and so they're running into problems here. There's no comprehensive strategy for mental health. The only time I saw the word mental in there was non-governmental, as in this is how we're going to move to private healthcare. And you talked about the independent candidate thought not being out in the public. A lot of that is in the plan. There's a focus on alternative therapies as opposed to traditional medicine. The big champion of alternative therapies was Dr. Stephen Meridew, the candidate who got turfed, who wanted to do healing touch instead of evidence-based care. And there's cash for anti-vax conspiracy theorists, which all points to me to a party that will be distracted and incapable of addressing pressing healthcare needs. And so the big missed opportunity is that they could show they are well positioned to govern, but instead Rustad came across a bit like a reckless rookie who wasn't ready to lead. But maybe I'm wrong. We'll see what happens.
Jillian, what did you think? And also, I didn't hear the sort of hair on fire privatization kind of knee-jerk reaction that you often have got with this in the past. And I wonder if that's partly because A, the system's so stressed right now, but B, the NDP are already doing a little bit of this, sending people for cancer care to Washington State because they can't meet the cancer guidelines of 4 weeks for breast and prostate cancer. So maybe the public's primed for a different discussion about healthcare and private inclusion, or I don't know. How do you view all that?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. It kind of makes me wonder if that's something that the government is kind of exploring behind closed doors. And I think that was definitely sort of the like if there's one message from this very lengthy document, it is that proposal to delve into more private facilities. But I think, like Jeff said, when you start to sort of dive into what the Conservatives are putting up, it doesn't fully hold up to scrutiny. They outline in the document how this is a model used by European countries that have seen better healthcare outcomes. And I clicked on one of the links they've got there, and they're talking about Sweden. But when you go and look at how Sweden has achieved better health outcomes, it's actually by improving equality across the board and investing in a lot more in preventative policies like reducing poverty, shoring up education, better funding schools, these kinds of things that really reduce the burden on the healthcare system. And so I think, in a roundabout way, the NDP are sort of right to talk about cuts because John Rustad has a history of being with the government that cut social services, but also is sort of, been hitting on the government's fiscal spending overall. So, I think it's right in that sort of roundabout way. I'm not sure where they got the other $4 billion figure on healthcare specifically, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Conservatives sort of square this within a comprehensive platform, because when you start picking examples from other countries, like, progressive European countries, they've got completely different systems across the board. So it's going to be interesting to see, what the Conservative answer for childcare and poverty and all these other things that kind of go into health outcomes are.
Mm-hmm. It is the double-edged sword of releasing individual platform planks this early on without the full platform. We don't know the fiscal framework, as Jeff said. Are they intending to balance the budget? If they are, how are they going to come up with an estimate of what this is? Because there's no cost figures in this, and how does it all fit together? I think is a good point. Allie, the BC United reaction to this was twofold. One, they complained that their ideas were stolen. Because they had come out with a sort of use private clinics to reduce wait lists a few weeks ago. And the second part was essentially that, John Rustad renaming the party, the BC Conservative Party, to the John Rustad Party and putting that into all of their messaging, which was new. What did you think of that?
Well, to put out a release claiming that they did it first is only seen as weak. Instead, they should have done a re-announcement to their plan that they had done weeks before to their base. No mention of Rustad, no mention of the Conservatives, because here's the difference: is the Conservatives rely on media and these now very polished announcements because they don't have the historical data, and they don't have like membership data in the numbers that the BC United have, and so the Conservatives the BC United need to remember that they are in a campaign and they're losing this because they should have just played the political game. Now, to be helpful to the BC United, what they should have done, and I've argued that the BC United have recruited one of the best rosters of candidates in their qualifications and in their experience. And so use that. Here's what they should have done. 1, send out an email with a re-announcement to their robust membership. 2, on Monday, put forward a panel of all of the doctors that they have running for them and talk about this policy healthcare announcement. It's not working, this whole like, I did it first, or I'm going to poke fun at you on the center right. Just be the better leader. So that's my one helpful, potentially, criticism. Ultimately, I think the BC United are playing this game of politics incorrectly. Instead, this is kind of like a scene from Mean Girls where Regina George won't let them sit at the cool kids table. And then you talk about how they, in this media statement, specifically said Rustad's party. And so I think what they're trying to do, that the BC United are hoping that with this new branding that they'll add some distance between Rustad and the Conservative name. But in an apples to apples comparison, the Kevin Falcon name also has a lot of baggage. So that's a little bit of a hit or miss on whether or not this is going to work for them. But yeah, we'll see. I just think it's a weak campaigning.
Mm-hmm. It is an interesting idea, Jeff. I think there's at least two or three doctors running for BC United, and a superstar candidate in Surrey, who is a doctor in the Surrey ER. And that idea seems to make a lot of sense to me, but instead we did it first, woe is us sort of response. What do you think?
I think that Kevin Falcon thinks that the only superstar BC United candidate is Kevin Falcon. I think that's the source of a lot of his problems managing caucus and taking advantage of opportunities like this. Didn't agree with Allie on the initial plan, but I agree with her 100% on what BC United should be doing. The message here isn't we did it first. The message is you can't trust the Conservatives to run healthcare because they're inexperienced and they spend more time chasing after hoaxes and conspiracy theories and listening to guys like Dr. Meridew than they will focused on your issues. I'm Kevin Falcon. I used to be the health minister. I've got a great team of actual health experts, doctors, leading people in the community on my team. And you can trust us. If you want to get rid of the NDP and you want to have a different approach, I'm your guy. And this is the team that you can count on to do it. So his response was weak and incomprehensible. And I don't understand the lack of self-awareness about how compromised the BC United and its leaders' brand is in that party right now.
Yeah. Jillian, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think we've talked about this a lot, but I think it shows how sort of a sense of entitlement that BC United continues to have, of feeling sort of entitled to a certain block of the voters. And they're kind of just, throwing a temper tantrum that they don't still have the support of those folks, instead of, looking in the mirror and wondering why that is. I think those are good recommendations from Jeff and Allie. And, I think they got kind of part of it right, where they're trying to sort of lean more into the Rustad branding and sort of the individual sort of kookiness of the Conservative candidates. But then the rest of the statement is just that kind of whining that they came up with these ideas first. And I think that to voters, they would rather hear, we want those ideas implemented, like they're good ideas. It doesn't matter who implements them. So I think that those are, the wrong things to be hitting on for United. I think, back to the drawing board again. Let's see if they do that.
That's the name of their platform. Back to the drawing board again.
Oh, poor BC United. Poor BC United. Such an easy target these days to kick around. But you're right. And I think those are all good points. They have, especially on the doctors issue, the NDP came out and had a sort of instant response to the Conservative platform, and United didn't. It was just what it was. So anyways, great discussion. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching and listening. Make sure you subscribe for all the episodes, and we will be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.